Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It is I, Stephen Epstein, otherwise known as Student Rabbi Shmuel, with another Devar Torah. This week we start a new book of the Torah, the second book, which is Exodus, or as it is known in Hebrew as Shemot, which is the word which means names. So in the Torah, there are only letters. Now in Hebrew, you have the letters, but you also have vowels, little what they call nikud marks that tell you how to vocalize the various words. There's also these cantillations known as trope that tell you how to sing it or how to chant the words. That's in the Torah. There is none of that. There's also no punctuation marks. So the way you know it's a new book is there's usually a space of about 4 lines between the various books, the different books of the Torah, and you know it's the first. You know which specific portion or parsha it is because the name of the parsha is usually one of the first words of the Torah. Now, last week I didn't do one of these little commentaries, these Devar Torah. I got very busy during the day, and by the time I got around to it, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We were approaching Shabbat, and I felt that if I had recorded something, then people might be inclined to look at it or view it during Shabbat, and I felt like I'd be contributing. I know a lot of you aren't Jewish, but I felt nevertheless I'd be contributing to something that is not in line with Jewish halacha or law. Anyway, so names. It starts out saying these are the names of the souls that came down, interesting use of words, from Canaan to Egypt. And this, of course, was Jacob and his family. And it was thought of that they were coming down because they were leaving the sanctification of what will be the Holy Land, and where they're practicing the beginnings of Torah, to the Egyptian society, which was, they believed in pagan gods. They believed almost everything was a god. So it was going down in terms of their ethics. That's kind of how they felt. Also, this is one of the reasons they were separated into the land of Goshen, a place where that was kind of far away, with the suburbs, if you will, of the main Egyptian city. So what happens here is that a Pharaoh, in the Torah it says a Pharaoh arose that knew not Jacob. Okay, so according to the commentary of the Sansino Chumash, which is the conservative commentary on the 5 books of Moses, Rabbi Hertz, the late great chief rabbi of the British Empire who edited it, makes the comments that it was actually a change of dynasty in Egypt. So the reign of pharaohs, the dynasty of pharaohs who were in place during the time of Joseph, were actually foreign conquerors. They came into Egypt, they conquered, they took control. Yes, they were benevolent rulers. Yes, they accepted the Egyptian pagan religion, but they were not native. So in the intervening time, within about 200 years, the native pharaohs, the native dynasty, had overthrown these rulers, and they had taken place, and they were more xenophobic. They didn't like outsiders. And the pharaoh that was in power did what a lot of leaders did in order to cement his own power. He said, these Israelites are foreign. Should an enemy come to conquer us or to attack us, these Israelites will probably join with them against us, so let us deal harshly. So what they did was they put them to work. They enslaved them, had them build at first the granaries. Okay. However, the Israelites, and we say Israelites instead of Jews. Israelite is somebody who is descended from Israel, who was Jacob, all right, and the 12 tribes who were still in place by then. Now, in the last few thousand years, the 10 of the tribes had broken away. They had been conquered. They had integrated into other societies. They lost all adherence to Torah. So now the only tribe the tribes that are left is mostly the tribe of Judah, hence Judaism. Of course, we have other tribes that are still in place, like the Levites, who are the priests and the caretakers of the Torah. They still exist, some of them. Those are the Levites, also remnants of Asher and Benjamin that also inhabited the area of Jerusalem in the southern part of Israel, which was Judea. So they are still in existence, but nevertheless, the religion is still called Judaism. So as the Israelites started to procreate, and they were very prolific, even under the harsh conditions, they still begat a lot of children. They expanded beyond Goshen. They were actually in all different walks of society. So the Egyptians, of course, were concerned about them taking over and becoming the majority rather than the minority. So when working them the harsh conditions, when that didn't curtail their procreation, what they did was they started to increase the amount of work that they did. Now, there's been a lot of talk that the Israelites built the pyramids. What the Egyptians did was it was basically make work. They gave them the worst task. They had them build in swamps and in horrible conditions. It was really to break their spirit. They didn't want them building anything significant, because then they might feel some pride, and that would add to their esteem. And the Egyptians wanted to do the exact opposite. When that didn't work, when the Israelites were still very prolific, okay, the Pharaoh decreed that the firstborn, the first male child of the Israelites, will be killed. Now, that was in response to what his astrologers and some of his magicians had foretold, that a savior of the Israelites was going to be born. So, trying to prevent that, of course, he dealt very severely and swiftly with the Israelite children, trying to kill all the firstborn. Now, within that frame, Moses was born, and his parents wanted to save his life. They put him in a basket of reeds and sailed him down the Nile. Now, some people believe that this is the backdrop of a story of a fictional character that was created back in the 1930s by Jerry Schuster and Joe Siegel. You'll all recognize a similar story of Superman, whose parents also rocketed to him to Earth in a basket of sorts in order to escape the dying planet Krypton. Well, Moses was found by Pharaoh's daughter, who was out with her attendants bathing in the Nile. And Pharaoh saw the child, saw that it was an Israelite child, but fell in love with him, wanted to adopt him, and called him Monios. Now, Monios was the Egyptian name. It was the Egyptian word for Moses. Moshe was the Hebrew word from Mashah, which means to draw out of the water. Okay, and raised him in the Egyptian palace. Now, from here, we have the story from the Mishnah. Mishnah is kind of like the folklore that surrounds the Torah, of how Pharaoh was bouncing Moses on his lap, and of course the astrologers warned that a savior was going to be born. Maybe it was Moses. So what he did was they brought two covered plates. One had coals, one had the crown, and they thought that whatever Moses would show them what he was going to do based on what he reached. So as Moses, the baby Moses, was reaching for the crown, an angel came down, pushed his hand so that he reached for the coals. It was hot. He put it in his tongue to cool it, and that created what some people felt was a speech impediment, which is why later on, to approach Pharaoh, he needed Aaron to be able to elaborate and vocalize his concerns and his requests of Pharaoh. So in the meantime, Moses grows up, and he maybe not realizes who he really is, but he happens upon an Egyptian taskmaster when he's like about 20 years old, wailing on an Israelite slave. He intervenes, he kills the taskmaster. The next day he goes out, and two of the Israelite slaves are there, and they said, "Oh, we saw what you did, we're going to tell Pharaoh." And Moses, of course, worried for himself, or realizes, gosh, these people are, I just saved one of their lives, and this is how they treat me? How weird. So he takes off, ends up in Midian, and at a well, like his his forefathers, Isaac and Jacob, ends up meeting his wife Zipporah, who with her sisters, daughters of Jethro, who was sort of a chieftain, sort of a priest of a Median tribe. They come about. He helps them water their flock, and comes into the family. Now, in the Orthodox Chumash, they say, well, when they saw Moses, they said, "Oh, this is an Egyptian happened upon us." And Moses did not correct them and say, "Well, actually, I'm an Israelite." And the Orthodox believe that this is the reason why he was denied access to the Promised Land, because he didn't identify at first with being an Israelite, being a Jew. Nevertheless, he becomes part of Jethro's family. He marries Zipporah. He has a son. He's out there with his sheep, and God recognizes his humanity, because Moses goes and gets a sheep who had wandered away from the flock, and he saw that the sheep was thirsty. He said, "Oh, if I had realized, little sheep, that you were thirsty and wanted a drink, I would have led you to the water myself." This impressed God. God brought him up to the mountain, where he introduced him to himself in three stages. First, there was the bush that didn't burn. He saw that. And then God says to Moses, this is holy ground, take off your feet. There should be no barrier between your skin and between the ground. He then sees an angel, and he then sees God. He doesn't see God, but he recognizes God's presence. To see God is not, it's hard to live, right? So God basically tells him, gives him his mission to go back to Egypt and approach Pharaoh, let my people go. He does that. He goes back to his house. He takes Zipporah and he takes his son Gershom. In the meantime, they get to Goshen. So he goes to. There you go. You're on camera. Yes, well, the conservatives believe, again, the question about why Moses was not allowed to enter the land, they say because God said, tap the rock. This is later on, of course, and you will bring forth water. Moses, of course, having 2.5 million whining people, out in the desert, just loses it, smacks the rock, and God says, well, you blew it, you're not getting in, all right? So it's a difference of opinion, but then again, in Judaism, again, there's always 2 or 3 reasons why things happen. So Moses ends up back in Goshen. He ends up back in the house of his parents, meets Aaron, meets his sister, brother Aaron, his sister Miriam, and he takes Aaron with him. He sends Zipporah and Gershom back to Jethro. He felt that there's too much strife going on. Now the Orthodox say that Moses' family were Levites, which was the priestly class. They weren't really being enslaved the way the rest of the Israelites were, being the priests. Right? So Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, you've enslaved us for over 100 years. Let me take our people out. Let's go out for 3 days so we can worship our God. Pharaoh said, I'm not familiar with your God, this God with no name. And in a way, he was right, because this was a fairly new concept. Nevertheless, he declines Moses' request, and instead, because of the audacity of one of the Israelites to come and get rid of this free labor that they have, he makes them make the bricks without any straw. Now, when you think about this, people said, well, again, we say, were the Israelites were they critical to building the pyramids? If you're running a construction company, you're going to give your people the best materials. You're not going to tell them don't make bricks without straw, because then the bricks aren't going to be as strong. Of course, you want them to use the best materials. So that's why we say it was busy work. It was meant to break the spirit of the Israelites rather than to actually do something constructive. So at the end of the Parsha, Moses is back with God. He's saying, you had me come and save them. Instead, I've made it worse. God says, wait till you see what I do now. And that sets the stage for next week's portion. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this, and hope it was meaningful and educational. And have a good week. Have a good weekend.